I found out my brother had been living my life the day a stranger walked into my office, looked me in the eye, and said, "You don't remember me, but 20 years ago, your brother introduced himself using your name." At first, I laughed. It sounded impossible. Then, the man pulled an old photograph from his jacket. There were two teenage boys standing beside a blue pickup truck. One of them was my brother. The other one was me. Except the name written on the back of the picture wasn't mine anymore. It was his. That's the day I realized my brother hadn't just lied about who he was. He had stolen my identity and built an entire life on it. I didn't know it yet, but before the week was over, he'd call me for help. And I'd have to decide whether to save the man who ruined my life or finally let karma do its job. My name is Ethan Walker, and for most of my life, I believed my older brother, Ryan, was simply the family's favorite. He was 2 years older than me, louder than me, funnier than me, and somehow always managed to escape the consequences of everything he did. If Ryan broke something, I got blamed. If Ryan skipped school, my parents asked what I had done to upset him. If Ryan got caught stealing from the local convenience store, my father would sigh, shake his head, and say, "Boys make mistakes." When I forgot to take the trash out one Tuesday evening, I lost my allowance for 3 months. That was our family. Ryan was the golden child. I was the insurance policy. I didn't hate him growing up, not at first. I actually admired him. When I was 8 years old, I wanted the same sneakers Ryan wore. I copied the way he combed his hair. I even practiced signing my name because I thought it looked cool next to his on birthday cards. Looking back, that's almost funny. Because years later, he'd be practicing my signature instead. Our parents owned a small hardware store in northern Ohio. It wasn't glamorous. The building smelled like fresh lumber, fertilizer, and old coffee. Dad worked 6 days a week. Mom handled the bookkeeping. Ryan and I swept floors after school. Customers knew us by name. Most of them assumed we'd inherit the business one day. That was the plan, until Ryan discovered there were easier ways to make money. He hated rules. He hated schedules. Most of all, he hated hearing the word no. When he was 16, he started hanging around older guys with expensive trucks and cash they never seemed to earn honestly. Dad warned him constantly, "Those boys aren't your friends." Ryan would laugh, "They're just smarter than everyone else." Dad answered with the same sentence every time, "No, son, they're just getting caught later." Ryan never listened. Bleer. I was different. I liked routine. I stayed after school to help teachers. I worked weekends at the hardware store. I saved every dollar. Not because I was naturally responsible, because I knew no one else was going to rescue me if I failed. My parents spent so much energy cleaning up Ryan's disasters that I learned to solve my own problems before anyone noticed I had them. It made me independent. It also made me invisible. Everything changed the summer I turned 18. I had just graduated high school. A local construction company offered me an apprenticeship. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to help with college later. Ryan had graduated 2 years earlier. By then, he'd bounced between jobs, girlfriends, and excuses. Nothing ever lasted. One Friday night, Dad called both of us into the kitchen. He placed 2 envelopes on the table. "I've saved enough to help each of you start your lives." Inside each envelope was a cashier's check. $10,000. To us, it felt like winning the lottery. Dad looked directly at Ryan. "This is your only chance." Ryan smiled. "You won't regret it." I remember believing him. I wish I hadn't. Mon Dieu. 3 weeks later, Ryan disappeared. No goodbye, no note, no phone call. His bedroom was empty. His clothes were gone. So was the $10,000. Mom cried for weeks. Dad searched neighboring counties. Police couldn't do much. Ryan was an adult. Adults had the right to disappear. Eventually, life moved on. Or at least we pretended it had. Dad stopped mentioning Ryan's name. Mom kept one family photo sitting on the fireplace. Every Christmas, she dusted it carefully before putting it back in exactly the same place. She always believed he'd come home. Dad never said it aloud, but I knew he didn't. Dad. 5 years passed. I finished trade school, started my own construction business, met the woman who would become my wife, Olivia. She wasn't impressed by money, mostly because I didn't have much. She liked that I showed up when I said I would, that I remembered birthdays, that I listened more than I talked. She once told me, You're the first man I've dated who doesn't make promises he can't keep. I married her 6 months later. For the first time, life felt stable, peaceful, normal, until the bank called. "Mr. Walker," the woman said, "we're following up on your delinquent auto loan." I laughed. "I don't have an auto loan." There was silence. Then she read me an address. It wasn't mine. She read me a truck model. I'd never owned one. Then she read the social security number attached to the account. Mine. Every digit. I felt my stomach drop. I told the representative there had to be some mistake. She replied with a sentence that changed everything. The identification documents matched perfectly. Perfectly. Except I had never signed them. I had never seen them. And somehow, someone else had been living under my name. At that moment, I still believed it was ordinary identity theft. A stranger, a hacker, some criminal halfway across the country. I had no idea the truth was sitting much closer to home. And when I finally discovered who had done it, I almost wished it had been a stranger. For the next 3 months, my life became a stack of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. The bank wasn't the only company looking for me. There were credit cards I'd never opened, a truck loan I'd never signed, medical bills from a hospital in Arizona, a cell phone contract in Nevada. Someone had been using my identity for years. Every time I proved one account was fraudulent, another one appeared. It felt like trying to empty a sinking boat with a coffee mug. One afternoon, I sat across from a fraud investigator named Karen. She spread dozens of files across the conference table. "I've investigated identity theft for almost 20 years, she said. "This isn't random." "What do you mean?" She pointed to the dates. "Most identity thieves strike quickly. They open everything within weeks." She slid another folder toward me. "Whoever did this has been using your identity slowly, carefully, for almost 2 decades. I stared at her. 20 years, Karen nodded. "They've treated your identity like it belonged to them." That sentence stayed with me, because it sounded less like theft, and more like someone borrowing a life. Married to bed. The police couldn't tell me much. Identity fraud cases crossed state lines, different jurisdictions, different agencies, different paperwork. Every detective told me the same thing: "We're working on it." It didn't feel like anyone was. Meanwhile, my credit score collapsed. My construction company lost a major equipment loan because the bank suddenly considered me high risk. A supplier I'd worked with for 8 years refused to extend credit. I had to lay off 2 employees. One of them looked at me before leaving and quietly asked, "You okay, boss?" I smiled. Yeah. It was the biggest lie I'd told in years. Olivia watched me fall apart one day at a time. One evening, she found me sitting alone in the garage. I hadn't turned on the lights. She sat beside me without saying anything. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Are you scared?" I wanted to say no. Instead, I nodded. "I've done everything right." "I know. I've worked every day since I was 18. "I know. I've never stolen from anyone." "I know. So why does it feel like I'm paying for someone else's mistakes?" Olivia took my hand. "Because maybe you are." Neither of us knew how true those words would become. About 6 weeks later, Karen called. "I found something." Her voice sounded different. Careful. Almost nervous. "I think you should come in." She handed me a photocopy from an old driver's license application. It was issued 19 years ago. The photograph was blurry. The hair was shorter. The face looked younger. But I recognized him immediately. Ryan, my brother. Only the name printed beside the photograph wasn't Ryan Walker. It was Ethan Walker, my name, my birthday, my social security number. Everything belonged to me, except the face. I couldn't breathe. Karen looked at me carefully. "You know him," I whispered. "That's my brother." She blinked. "Your brother?" I nodded. "He disappeared 20 years ago." Karen slowly leaned back in her chair. "I don't think he disappeared." She tapped the file. "I think he became you, Muerte." The room felt impossibly quiet. I remembered every time Ryan borrowed my clothes in high school. Every time he'd asked to see my learner's permit because he thought the picture was funny. Every time he'd joked that we looked enough alike to fool strangers. Back then, it felt harmless. Now, those memories made my skin crawl. Had he been planning this all along? Muerte. Karen continued reading. "Your brother obtained a replacement birth certificate 6 months after leaving Ohio. How?" "We're still investigating." Then she looked at me. "But someone with detailed knowledge of your personal history helped him." I frowned. "What are you saying?" I'm saying strangers don't know where you were born. They don't know your first elementary school. They don't know your mother's maiden name. They don't know your childhood address. Someone had told him. Someone close. Mindy. That night, I drove to my parents' house. Dad answered the door. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders had started to stoop. His hair had turned almost completely gray. Everything okay? No. He invited me inside. Mom was folding laundry. She smiled. Then she saw my face. The smile disappeared. I placed the driver's license copy on the kitchen table. Neither of them spoke. Dad picked it up. His hands started shaking. Mom covered her mouth. Oh, Ryan. I looked at both of them. You knew. Dad's eyes widened. No. You recognized the picture immediately, because he's our son. I slammed my hand onto the table. He stole my life. Mom began crying. Dad stayed silent. Then, very quietly, he said something that changed everything. There was one phone call. I stared at him. What phone call? Dad looked at the floor. About 6 months after Ryan disappeared, he called. My heart stopped. You told me you never heard from him. I lied. The room felt like it was spinning. Dad swallowed hard. He said he was in trouble. What kind of trouble? He wouldn't say. What did he want? Dad closed his eyes. He wanted your documents. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You gave them to him? Dad shook his head immediately. No, I refused. Then how did he get them? Dad looked toward Mom. She started crying even harder. Finally, she whispered, I mailed them. I felt every ounce of air leave my lungs. You, what? He promised he'd only need them for a few weeks. He said employers had mixed up paperwork. He said he'd explain everything when he came home. She buried her face in her hands. I believed him. The kitchen went silent. My own mother had handed my identity to the man who would spend the next 20 years destroying it. And somehow, the worst part of the story still hadn't happened. I don't remember leaving my parents' house. One moment, I was standing in their kitchen. The next, I was sitting in my truck, with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers had gone numb. For 20 years, I thought Ryan had stolen my identity through some elaborate scam. Instead, my own mother had mailed him everything he needed. My birth certificate, my social security card, copies of my school records, documents I didn't even know she'd kept. She hadn't meant to destroy my life, but intention didn't change the outcome. Nai Biladen. When I got home, Olivia opened the front door before I reached it. She took one look at my face. What happened? I couldn't answer. I simply handed her the folder Karen had given me. She spent 15 minutes reading every page. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of disbelief. Your parents helped him? They didn't know. They still sent him your identity. I nodded. Olivia sat beside me on the couch. What are you going to do? I don't know. For the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't. Investigation moved quickly after that. Federal agents became involved. Identity theft across multiple states, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, tax fraud. The list kept growing. Ryan hadn't simply borrowed my name. He had built an empire on it. There were business licenses, vehicle titles, apartment leases, insurance policies, even voter registrations. Everything carried my name. Everything pointed to him. Karen called me almost every week with another discovery. Each one felt worse than the last. Making ein end. One Friday afternoon, she invited me back to her office. I think we found him. My heartbeat doubled. She rotated her computer monitor toward me. A driver's license photograph appeared on the screen. Older, a little heavier, short beard, gray beginning to show around his temples. But there was no mistaking him. Ryan, alive, living in Colorado, still using my identity. I stared at the photograph for what felt like forever. 20 years without a birthday call, without attending Mom's funeral, without checking whether Dad was still alive. Yet somehow, he'd managed to renew my driver's license 3 different times. Karen broke the silence. He owns a construction company. I almost laughed. Construction, the same career I'd built, the same profession he'd mocked when we were teenagers. Then Karen added something that made the room go silent. His company has won several community awards. I frowned. What? He coaches youth baseball. No. He volunteers with veterans. No. He sponsors local charities. I shook my head. That's impossible. Karen looked uncomfortable. To everyone there, she paused. He's you. Maud, that sentence haunted me. Somewhere in Colorado, People believed Ethan Walker was generous, kind, successful, reliable. The irony was almost unbearable. Ryan had stolen my identity and then used it to become the man I'd spent my entire life trying to be. Barandas. A week later, federal agents finally moved in. They arrested Ryan outside his office. The news spread faster than I expected. Local television stations covered the story. Headlines appeared online. Colorado business owner accused of massive identity fraud. The photographs were surreal. Reporters kept calling him Ethan Walker. Watching my own name scroll across national news made me sick. Friends started calling. Customers asked questions. People I'd never met sent angry messages online. Some thought I was the criminal. Others believed I was lying. The internet had already convicted someone. It just picked the wrong brother. Karen warned me. This is going to get messy. She wasn't exaggerating. Ryan claimed everything had been a misunderstanding. He insisted I'd given him permission years ago. He even produced forged letters, supposedly signed by me. Every lie created 3 more. Every document required experts to examine. The case grew larger every week. Then, something happened that nobody expected. Ryan asked to see me, personally. No lawyers, no investigators, just me. Karen immediately advised against it. You don't owe him anything. Dad begged me not to go. He'll manipulate you. Olivia squeezed my hand. If you meet him, she looked directly into my eyes. Do it for closure, not forgiveness. Closure. There was a difference. 3 days later, I walked into the county detention center. The correctional officer led me through 2 heavy steel doors. Ryan was already waiting. 20 years had changed both of us. The confidence was still there, but age had carved lines into his face. His shoulders weren't as broad anymore. His eyes looked tired. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ryan smiled. The same crooked smile he'd had since high school. You got old. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it reminded me exactly why I'd stopped missing him. You stole 20 years from me. Ryan leaned back. I borrowed them. No. You had your own life. You ruined mine. He shrugged. You still did okay. The words hit harder than I expected. Still did okay? My marriage nearly collapsed under financial pressure. My business almost failed. My reputation had been dragged through the mud. And this man still couldn't admit what he'd done. Then he leaned forward. I need a favor. Of course he did. Even after 20 years, Ryan hadn't called because he was sorry. He hadn't asked to meet because he loved me. He wanted something. Again. I folded my arms. What could you possibly want from me now? Ryan lowered his voice. They're charging me with everything. They should. I can survive prison. His expression changed for the first time. Real fear. But my daughter can't. I frowned. Daughter? He nodded slowly. She's 16. I felt the room grow very quiet. I've never met her. I know. Does she know who you really are? Ryan looked away. No. My stomach tightened. There it was. The first honest thing he'd said all day. Then he whispered the words I never expected to hear. She thinks she's your daughter. And in that instant, I realized Ryan hadn't only stolen my identity. He had stolen an entire family.